A lot of dissatisfaction in terms of the rising cost, and that's causing, perhaps having an impact on investor sentiment. What's your take on this election and the impact on the investment community?
Morning, Haslinda. Thank you for having me today. For me, from the investment perspective, we're still seeing strong economic fundamentals regardless of what's happening in the elections. Growth in Malaysia is still at 5.5%, inflation is about 3%, unemployment is about 3%, and if you talk about youth unemployment, as you said earlier, while it's a bit high at 10%, it's still lower than what you see in Singapore. So you see still a lot of opportunities here in Malaysia. And when I'm looking at investments, I look at companies itself, there are many companies who are looking to relocate from overseas to Malaysia, companies looking to invest in Malaysia, and I still see a lot of opportunities over here in Malaysia.
Investors look for policy continuity. Does an opposition win necessarily mean a reversal of the policies?
I would say if you look at the opposition manifesto versus the Barisan manifesto, the Barisan manifesto actually has a lot of continuation into the current policies that the government is doing. And if you talk to the business community as a whole, what they're looking for is business continuity. And that includes fiscal policies, for example, GST, which is a hot topic at the moment. And for example, GST, it consists about 20% of government revenue, and that's actually a very important part of how the government is run and what funds the government operations itself. So it is actually vital for the Malaysian economy.
What should the top priorities be for the government that comes into power next?
To me, there's three priorities that I've nailed down for whoever that comes in next. One is economic growth, 5.5%. That's amongst the best in the region. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be pushed further. And how does that come from? Point two, investments. Year to date, there's about $1 billion of equity inflows into Malaysia. That shows how well the economy is doing and the investors' confidence, foreign investor confidence in Malaysia itself. And that is to be a continuation of that. In the VC space, for particular where I'm at, the government has already promised to invest R1 billion into about $250 million in the ecosystem for local international VCs, and there's to be a continuation of that for people to have confidence in the market itself.
Speaking of confidence, at issue at this election is the 1MDB corruption scandal. Do you think, to what extent has investment, or rather investor sentiment, been affected by the scandal?
To be fair, when I moved back to Malaysia from Hong Kong 2.5 years ago, everyone was talking about 1MDB. Now, 2.5 years on, governance issues have been identified, lessons learned. But
investigations are still ongoing across several jurisdictions, including the US, Switzerland. There's still no resolution yet.
Yes, but what everyone from the business community is looking for is moving forward. How do we move forward from there, learn from the lessons that has happened, and how do we continue to invest in Malaysia? How do we continue to invest, help our Malaysian companies export, help our Malaysian companies grow? And I think the focus is more on that. People are tired of hearing about 1MDB, of what has been happening over there. And we just want to grow, we just want to contribute, we just want to invest. And that's where I'm coming from.
What's the biggest risk, though? Would transparency and corruption be an issue?
To me, when there's policy uncertainty, especially on the fiscal side, that brings a big risk. So how a lot of the investor community views Malaysia is through our ratings. So if we see a sovereign downgrade, it will impact a lot of the investor community. Why? We still, for instance, for a venture fund, we still get a lot of investment interest from Hong Kong, from the Middle East, from the US, and what they read Bloomberg, and they see what's been happening and what really happens in Malaysia.
Malaysia has talked about a digital transformation, which is also a strategy being adopted by the rest of the region, including economies like Singapore and Hong Kong. How can Malaysia compete in this space?
And one of the big things that's happened over the past 1 year is the launch of the digital free trade zone with MDEC and Alibaba. And that's been a big push factor for a lot of companies into shifting their focus over here. And that increases the attention that we have on Malaysia at the moment. And as a whole, for companies, to me, the partners that we've spoken to, the US and the Europe, why they want to move here. Malaysia's cost of doing business is very reasonable. There's a good use of language, whether it's Bahasa, whether it's English over here.
But a lack of skills.
I would say there is, I've worked in Hong Kong, I've worked in Singapore, there is a skills gap that needs to be improved on. But at the same time, I've hired a whole local team. I've built up my local team. And to me, they're just as good as my colleagues in Hong Kong and Singapore. They just need the right training. They just need the right investment, and they will grow from there. Also, I've seen a lot of friends who, for example, my partner who moved back from Hong Kong to Malaysia. So we do see a brain gain to a certain extent from people who are just wanting to contribute. It also helps that obviously the economies in the US and Europe are not doing too well, so they would want to move back anyway. And they somehow, for Malaysia, there's always a home country bias to it.